Welcome back to the research stage, everyone. Next up is a session on open science, which makes science and research collaborative and accessible to professionals and amateurs alike. I'll hand things off to Thea Sherer from Springer Nature, who will moderate this session.
Thanks very much, Deborah. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you're watching us from. My name is Thea Sherer, and I'm Director of Group Communications at the research publisher Springer Nature, which is delighted to partner with CogX on the research stage this week, bringing several speakers who are highlighting exciting research advances. And as with this session, we're also sharing some insights into ways in which we think the research ecosystem as a whole can help drive forward solutions to some of the world's most pressing challenges as our response to that overarching question that CogX asks, how do we get the next 10 years right? It's my pleasure today to invite to the stage Ritu Dhand, who will be speaking about the opportunities of open science, and we think that makes up one part of the answer to that question. Ritu is Vice President Editorial for the Nature portfolio of journals and has been at Nature for more than 20 years, joining first as an editor, where she built on her previous experience of more than 10 years in cancer research in both London and Toronto. As you're listening to Ritu's talk, if you do have any questions, please enter them into the Q&A box and I'll be moderating a Q&A session after her talk. Ritu, over to you.
Thank you very much, Thea. Thank you, Deborah. And I want to thank the organisers at CogX for the opportunity to be able to talk today. As you have heard, I'm going to talk about the opportunities of open science. And there's many aspects to why open science is so important. For the researchers, it will accelerate the speed that science is done. There is an impact on society. It will help solve real-world problems faster. And moreover, between researchers and society, open science improves trust. So what is open science? It's something that is talked around about a lot, especially in the research arena, but it's also important for society to understand why open science is important for them. There are many definitions for open science, and I have one here by Foster, who are an EU-funded initiative into open science, and they define open science as the practice of science in such a way that others can collaborate and contribute, where research data, their lab notes, and all research processes are freely available under terms that enable reuse, redistribution, and reproduction of the research and all its underlying data and methods. And here you can see the various elements of open research, and I will be talking more about these elements. Just to quickly go over them, there are things as open notebooks so that research lab notes can be shared immediately. Any data that's produced can be shared immediately. When the research is being peer-reviewed for validation, that operation can be made open to all. The research papers can be made open access so that anyone can access them. Reagents can be open source so that they can easily be found and used. Social media, social networks are an important part of open science. Citizen science can contribute, and that's when the wider society can engage with research. And of course, educational resources can be and should be open. So let's start by looking at the researcher life cycle. And I can take you through the stages of how that research happens and where things can be shared. So we're going to start at the top left-hand corner. The author will write the grant. Now, grants are funded by bodies called funding bodies, and they want data to be widely shared. The author receives the grant and they will begin their experiments. And, you know, one would hope and think that researchers, as they create data, it would be open to share so that we can build upon it. Once the research is completed and they write the first draft paper, which sort of summarizes the research, it can be shared in open repositories called preprint servers. And it's called a draft because the research hasn't been validated by experts. That happens at the journals. When you submit the paper to the journal, the whole peer review process is an opportunity where independent experts from around the world will validate the research. And from the journal's perspective, this whole process can also be made open, and what the experts say can be released, and who the experts were that actually did that review can be made open. The paper is published, and again, this is where the journals can either mandate that certain data is made open, but they can certainly encourage. So you may have gathered from the way that I was speaking that that doesn't happen. Not all researchers want to share. And this cartoon, I think, summarizes how many researchers feel. They have invested a lot of time, a lot of effort into creating these data, and they want to get as much out of that data as they possibly can before they start sharing it widely. And that's part of the publish or perish problem, which I will talk more about on the next slide. There is also the intellectual property rights, patents associated with research that's produced. And you need infrastructure to be able to share research. And I will talk about that in the next slide as well. So this first cartoon, I thought depicted very well how difficult it is to publish a research paper. And usually the more prestigious or higher impact a journal, the harder it becomes with more obstacles along the way. The research paper within the scientific community has become the currency of choice. It is now a currency for promotion, receipt of grants, and the way that researchers look at the research papers is the journals that the research was produced in. Now, because there is so much emphasis and value on this output as a research paper, the scientists want to be the first to publish and gain all the credit for it. And there is a conflict now with sharing information openly before you've actually got to that stage. Research has also become very commercialized. All universities, institutes will have departments that take care of patents and transfer agreements between other institutes and individuals. We've seen with COVID how much money can be made in research, but it's true in the physical sciences as well with the big energy problem. You know, a lot of people are invested in research and want to make money from that investment. And that again brings about a conflict. If everything is shared openly, you can't put a patent on it. You cannot, it's much more difficult to make money for it. So that is another conflict. And finally, but by no means least, you need the infrastructure in place to be able to share data and reagents openly. You need open repositories which curate different data sets and allows them to be shared so that you can reproduce what was done, and they are interoperable, so you can share between individuals. Databases are expensive to create and maintain. No one really wants to take the responsibility to do that, and it's often funding bodies, governments that play that role. You need different repositories for different data sets. So, just building one big repository is not enough. So all of these issues also present obstacles to sharing data. Now, we are all living through the global COVID pandemic. And I think for the first time, the reach of science has been properly realized. The real world value of open science and sharing has become clear. And I just want to walk you through how different it has been. As a scientist myself, it has been a joy to see the level of sharing that has taken place. And I'm going to start with social media has played an enormous part in that sharing. Twitter, Facebook, blogs have been alive with sharing of scientific information. Researchers are sharing data as it happens. This does not happen very often, helping each other sort of work through issues and problems. When early data is being shared, they're sort of peer reviewing it in real time, pulling out what the concerns are, showing what the riches of a data set are. And on Twitter, everything is in a lay language, or at least researchers are trying very hard to put it in lay, because social media is open to all. And journalists have absolutely gained from this open source sharing of information. And we have seen some incredible journalism in our newspapers, in the scientific publications obviously have always done this, but it has made its way to general society in a way that it hasn't before. The other side of this sharing was started with the Wellcome Trust, calling all journals to sign a pledge. And that pledge states that we will share as much and everything of the research around COVID as we can when it happens. So in the first instance, we are mandating early sharing of the research in the form of preprints as it is being submitted. Nature has its own preprint server that we are associated with, but bioRxiv has been a community server that has been widely used, and you can see nearly 17,000 coronavirus articles have been submitted in just over a year. As the data is being created, it's being shared with open repositories, and the NCBI have put together this amazing resource which allows you to sort of act as a shop window to where different data types are being stored, and that's been incredibly helpful. And there are many other open repositories where data for COVID has been shared. And not finally, but certainly very importantly, all the journals have agreed to make the papers open if they don't publish open access. And this landscape has just built upon itself and driven this amazing sharing of wealth for COVID, and I am sure is a major contributor to getting drugs and vaccines as quickly as we have. And more recently, the spotlight on open science has shone so brightly. The G7 also discussed open science over the weekend, and they've made a pledge to promote the efficient processing and sharing of research data as openly as possible and as securely as necessary across the G7 and beyond, by improving the availability, sustainability, usability, and interoperability of research data, technologies, infrastructure, and services. We will work together to address the administrative, legal, and regulatory barriers that hinder our scientific cooperation and slow our ability to respond to crises. This is amazing to get this kind of commitment from the G7. If you remember back to what I said a couple of slides ago, part of the problem is the infrastructure, is the admin, is the regulation. And if we can get commitment at this level, we will certainly see change. Now, open science is not a new thing. The journals, the research community have been engaging in open science for years. And the nature journals are committed to supporting open science. And for the rest of the talk, I'm going to take you through the infrastructure, the support, the initiatives that we have put in place in order to support the scientific community to be more open. So I see open science depending on 5 pillars that I am going to talk about in more detail in this talk. Firstly, there's that early sharing of research in its sort of preliminary form before it's been validated, but there is a draft available using preprint servers as open repositories. There is the whole peer review process and how we make that more transparent and more open, sharing what was done by whom. I'm going to talk about the support we're trying to give to our researchers to share data and how we've invested in making code available. People often don't talk about my 4th pillar, protocols, but these are absolutely a necessity to be able to have open science, share research. Scientific research is one big recipe book. If those recipes aren't openly available, it becomes very difficult to reproduce the research, to build upon the science. And protocols are surprisingly not shared openly. Method sections are, but protocols are different. And I'm going to talk about that. And open access. I mean, this is something that, a lot, 20 years plus has been a big issue. And that's actually making the research open. So I'm going to start with open access. Many of you will be familiar with the fact that Nature are subscription journals. That means that research institutes and universities have to buy a subscription, which is then made available to anyone affiliated with that institute. But we have, in January this year, announced that we will now be publishing open access. So that research is available with a CC BY license. and our APC will be 9.5K. Now, the reason that the APC is much higher than other journals is open access has traditionally been something that's been seen with high volume journals. You publish a lot of articles, and that builds a revenue for the publishing house that they need to maintain their operations. The nature journals are low volume publishers. We select, we filter, we publish the highest impact science. So we cannot make the use of having more sort of incremental APCs and a large volume of them. But we are working to make that APC more accessible. And I'm going to talk through some of that in this slide. So as I said, the nature journals are now publishing open access. We call ourselves transformative journals, and transformative journals means not that we not only will we publish research open access, but we want to promote the value of open access to the research community, and we have many initiatives in play with which to do that. We also appreciate that the cost of publishing in Nature is high, and we're working behind the scenes to build agreements with institutes and countries, which we call transformative agreements, which means that the institute, the university, or the country will take responsibility for paying the cost of the APC to publish open access, and which means the authors from those institutes are free to publish without having to take care of the payment. And we've signed one such agreement with Max Planck Digital Library. All authors from these institutes will now no longer have to pay to publish open access. That has been taken care of at a higher level. We also have a pilot called the Guided Open Access Pilot, and this works by your research being submitted to the journal of your choice, the research journal of your choice, but it will also be considered by 2 other journals that are related. If you agree to having your research assessed in this way, the APC for publishing in the research journal will be 50% of the list price. You are given that decision. You are told where we think the paper would best be sort of published, but it's completely up to you whether you then continue your journey with us or you take the paper elsewhere. And this is a trial that's currently live on Nature Physics, Nature Genetics, and Nature Methods. And we will run this to the end of the year and then make a consideration of whether it's something we can roll out further. And of course, as subscription journals, authors will still be able to choose to publish their work using the existing traditional route, where authors will publish free of charge and their primary research is made available to institutions and individuals who subscribe to the journal. So, as I said, being able to share research early in its first form is important for open science, and we not only encourage, but we also support early sharing of research. So all our journals are linked to the Research Square preprint server, so that our authors can post a preprint at submission with a license of their choice. We allow preprints to be cited in reference lists, and if a speaker is talking at a meeting and their preprint has been deposited, we allow the researcher to engage with the media on it. I'm going to talk a little bit about open data now. So many people think that publishing making the research paper available is going to resolve the problem of open data. Open access, unfortunately, does not lead to open data. Just because the paper is available doesn't mean that the data behind the paper will also be freely available. And as I've written here, open access publishing alone is not enough to open code, data, and protocols. At the Nature Journals, we do believe in open data, and we've invested in promoting and supporting open research on all our journals. So all our journals contain a succinct data availability statement, which is freely available. This statement is the part of the paper where you can find the accession code, source codes, algorithms, any unique identifiers and associated web links for publicly available data sets, and where an author can make known conditions for access if there are any. So often, not all our researchers have deposited their data into open repositories. So we do work with our authors. We show them repositories that exist and the cost if there is one, size limits of data sets, because not all repositories can have limitless data sets, and how they curate the data to sort of support the authors on which repositories may be suitable. The editors go one step further, and as part of our policy, an author is allowed to say that they're not making data available openly now, but it will be available upon request. This does still align with our policy. And some of our editors are going back to the author when they've noted that it's available on request to ask why and reinforce that open deposition is in line with the journal policy. And what we've found is that many more researchers will actually deposit their data with this if we give them this extra nudge and extra support of where to go. And it does turn out that a lot of authors just aren't aware of all the repositories that they could use, or just need a little push to do this. So this is the results of a trial on a journal where, after engaging with the authors in this way, we found 87% of papers had publicly open data, which is phenomenal, because on a life science journal, it sort of averages between 40 to 50%. So nearly a doubling. And we hope to roll this out on all journals later this year. We have launched a journal called Scientific Data. This journal publishes large data sets, and they publish descriptors, which are detailed technical notes on how the data set was created and how it can be used. And we allow authors to co-publish a research paper and another more detailed descriptor on the data set to encourage authors to do this. It's peer-reviewed, it's open access, you get support with data curation, it will support the sharing of data. We've also invested in effective peer review of code to ensure that good source code is available. So we work with CodeOcean, who are a software container tool, and their platform is cloud-based. This allows code, they have the code, well, you can deposit the code, and they have the environment necessary to rerun the code and reproduce the results. This allows proper documentation of code. We peer review the code in this format, so reviewers are able to check functionality and reproducibility. And code is eventually shared openly with a DOI. Many of you will have heard about the problem with reproducibility. This was about 10 years ago. Nature published a commentary which alluded that of 53 studies that these authors had tried to reproduce, only 6 could actually be reproduced. Now, the problem here was definitely not misconduct or making up results or all of that sort of side of things. The problem was there was inadequate reporting of methodology, and statistical reporting was very poor. Now, as I alluded to at the start of my talk, the method section is very important to reproduce the research. This is how other researchers will be able to build on what is published. But this is often the last section of the research paper to be written, and it gets the least amount of attention. And in the biomedical sciences, life sciences, we find that statistical reporting is poor. So on the Nature journals, we created this checklist, which authors are given if they are sent for peer review, and they are asked to add a lot more detail on things that are often missed with the reporting of the experimental design and the statistics that were used. An independent study by McLeod and co-workers looked at, in 2017, looked at a number of statistical criteria for compliance in research. They looked at Nature papers that had used the checklist with non-Nature papers who hadn't. And they were looking at reporting for randomization, blinding, and sample size, and they found that 64% of the Nature papers complied with these criteria, and from the non-Nature journals, only 7% did. So it's made a huge difference in the reporting of statistics and the experimental design. 83% of our authors feel that the checklist has improved the reporting of statistics. And 78% of Nature journal authors continue to use the checklist, even when they're not publishing at Nature. I alluded to the importance of protocols. We have launched an open repository for protocol deposition. It's called the Protocol Exchange. We encourage all our authors to post protocols of relevant methods on all our Nature papers. Protocols get a DOI, they can be updated, openly shared, commented on, and we do engage with our authors to try and get them to submit one of these. At the beginning, I also talked about the whole peer review process and making that open. And over the years, we have been working to make the peer review process more transparent. We publish peer review comments on Nature Communications. We've been doing that since 2015. And this year, we started publishing the peer review comments on Nature, and we're trialing on 8 research journals as well. At the end of the year, if all goes well, we hope to roll this out on all journals. Since last year, on all our journals, we allow reviewers to be publicly named. We want to acknowledge their contribution to the peer review process, but we also want to be transparent about who we went to for expert advice. And on Nature Human Behavior and Nature Communications, we're publishing this new format called Registered Reports, which allows the sharing of a research paper at a much earlier stage, at that experimental design stage, before the actual research is done. And now my final slide, we also support the wider research community to promote open science initiatives. We have collaborations with ORCID. We're supporting corresponding authors, depositing ORCID IDs. We collaborate with COS, which is an open science initiative. And by engaging with the community, we hope that we are able to see, we the wider community progressing to open science faster. And with that, I will say thank you for your time. And if there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Thanks, Ritu. That's great. I've got a couple of questions here. One I wanted to start with is around the impact of the pandemic. So that quote from the G7 over the weekend, I think is amazing. To what extent do you think that would have happened without the recognition over the past year of the importance of openness and how that has accelerated things during the pandemic?
It's difficult to say because we've been banging the open science drum. The wider research community, the journals, the funding bodies have been talking about open science for a very long time. This year, I don't know how many of you are aware of the Plan S initiative. That also came into being, where a number of research bodies pledged to support open science publishing. And that has had a huge impact. But I think without a doubt, COVID has absolutely brought home how important open science is to society. And, you know, we know that COVID isn't the last virus that may impact us. We are all aware that there are many others that could, and we want to be better placed to be able to deal with any other global pandemics that may hit us. So I think it's all contributed, but without doubt, COVID has played a huge part.
We've just got a couple of minutes left, but there's a question here about citizen science and the role of citizen science. Can you say a little bit about what you see the future there and how that plays in?
It's that there hasn't been a lot of citizen science in the literature, as it were. That we've seen elements where I remember one piece of research where the community sort of all engaged with documenting the structure of a protein and how amazing it was. Many hands make light works comes to mind, and I think that is part of it. We haven't done this very much, but if we do start to make our research more accessible, if the community, wider community, beyond researchers do start to engage, I don't know, doors will certainly open. Things will happen that we probably wouldn't have dreamed of could happen in the way that we've seen. I wouldn't say they're lay, but they're certainly not biomedical researchers engaging with researchers on Twitter. Sometimes having that different perspective coming in from a different angle allows you to see things differently. And that is what opens doors. That is what accelerates the speed of science. And so citizen science at that level as well will play a major part in accelerating the pace of research.
That's really fascinating. I wish we had another 10 minutes to keep talking about that, but we don't, unfortunately. Thank you so much, Ritu. I think we have come to a nice conclusion. Thank you to everybody for joining us and to hear about this insight into how open science can help us to get the next 10 years right. And that brings the session to an end. So I'm going to pass on over to Deborah. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, ladies. So a big takeaway is that many forces are driving the open science revolution, including social media, improved journalism, more collaboration between researchers, and expanded peer reviewing. Thanks so much for joining this session. Don't forget to explore the virtual expo booths and networking area during the break. And of course, don't forget to share your thoughts and findings on social media using the hashtag CogX 2021.